Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell and I'm here with something new. So I am going to be asking a bunch of experts in automation to give me some tips and tricks. Well, I say some, I'm going to be asking 4 or 5. Now this could be something from a newbie to maybe a little bit more seasoned, maybe to an expert. So it should be different from every individual, and I'm just going to start with myself. So the top 5 that I have here, and this is in no particular order, but right now, number 1, I'm saying write down your process, often referred to as like pseudo coding, right? So the idea being there's something I want to automate. I'm hopefully a subject matter expert in that thing, but often to kind of figure out all the steps to keep me on track, what I'll do is I'll just open up, a document like a Google Doc, or maybe a Notepad++ or whatever it happens to be. If I'm in VS Code Studio, I can open that up and I'll really just write down line by line kind of all the steps required to do this thing. And I like doing it kind of like loosely like that, as opposed to trying kind of to write my automation just as I go very slowly, because oftentimes when I'm doing that, I get a little bit too mired down in the minutia and I'll kind of skip steps. And so it's a little bit easier for me to kind of see what's going on. Now, it's also really good for kind of discovering new processes to automate. Like if there is something that we do that we wouldn't traditionally think about automating it, maybe just kind of writing down the little pseudocode steps. Actually, we can say, oh, you know what, we could automate that and this, and maybe we could automate, it's good for like team collaboration as well. So that's kind of my number 1. All right, that leads us to number 2. So I'm going to be looking at how do I add some new automations kind of at a regular cadence. And so what I recommend people doing is once a month, right? You don't have to spend a ton of time on it. Maybe just the first of every month, take a little bit of time, maybe you yourself or maybe your team together, look at your ticket system or your Jira board or whatever it is that you guys are using to like run through projects, and then just look at what consumed the most time, right? Like, so if it is a ticket system, what were the most tickets you processed? Like, what did they kind of relate to? And then start reviewing, is this something we can automate, right? Like pick one thing from that list, usually something that's occupying most of your time, and see if you can automate that task, right? And then kind of loop that back to step 1 and pseudo code that thing, right? It's a really good way to discover and add new automations to your environment. Number 3, I'm going to say, is to, in your playbooks. So I'm an Ansible guy. I've been using Ansible for a long time, right? And so a lot of my tips around Ansible or Ascender, right? Kind of the automation platform to execute those things on. But I like putting my variables at the top of my playbook. So oftentimes in your tasks, in your playbook, you're going to have variabilized information kind of all over the place. And most often, those variables are going to be coming from you. From when you execute, you're sending in extra variables and it's going to override those things. What I like to do is at the very top, I like to create a vars section, and I like to add all of the variables in there that, and I'll set a default value, even if it's not the one I'm going to use. I like to have them all up there. That way, they're it's sort of like a documentation piece, right? I can see everything that's in there, so I know what's available to me. So when I'm going to reuse this playbook, say I haven't touched it in 6 months, I'm going to reuse this playbook. Well, I can easily right at the top, I can see all the variables I've defined and have them ready for replacement, right? So I can easily know in my playbook, all right, well, I'm going to replace this variable, this variable, this variable. I don't actually have to kind of dig around, right? Keep it all in one place. Number 4 is, again, very Ansible specific. And for me, I, by default at the top of my playbook, I guess under the host section, I put gather facts : false. And so by default, your playbook is designed to gather facts, which is to connect to your Linux server infrastructure and gather a bunch of information that's already variabilized. And it's really cool, and you can use it in your automations, and it's really neat. The only problem is, say you're running on, well, for example, a networking host. Generally, if you're going to run gather facts on a networking host, it's going to break your playbook. So you want those off by default there. I tend to do a lot of network automations, which is really how I got used to doing that. But I also learned if you're not using the gather facts information, right? Like, so I am operating against Linux hosts in this example, right? If I'm not using any of that variabilized information, it adds a little bit of processing time for every host I'm going to connect to, right? So if I go ahead and turn that off, knowing I'm not using it, if I turn that off, it'll make my playbooks just a little bit more efficient. Number 5 is kind of a big one for me. And it's something I've done for the vast majority of my career, not just in automation, but in kind of other aspects. And that is share your work, right? I'm a big proponent of sharing your work, open source, put those things out there. Even if you're not writing code, remember open source is more than just code, right? It's sharing examples, it's education, it's documentation, it's all of those pieces, right? So if you're writing playbooks and they are, say, internal to your company, if you do find a novel and interesting way of writing those playbooks, if you could make them a little bit more generic, sanitize them a bit, and then put them up in a public Git repository, that's amazing, right? It's going to help the community. It's going to help other people. And also, I've learned that, like, for me, it's hard to ask other people for help. I think that's a very human thing. But also, I've learned that if I start sharing my work, it makes it a little bit easier for me to ask others for help, because you know what? I'm already helping others. I'm already trying to reciprocate, right? And trying to do that kind of pay it forward sort of thing. So not just sharing your work, but also offer to help if you have the time and inclination. And keep in mind, you don't have to know everything, right? You have to remember that there are some people that are beginners, right? It may have been so long that you forget it. Maybe you feel like you don't have anything to contribute, but you do. So be sure to offer to help. Well, I'll tell you what, those are my 5 quick tips. Told you it wasn't going to take very long. If you have any questions for me or comments or anything associated with that, or you would actually like to be a guest and do a quick 5 automation tips, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions about Ascender or automation, obviously we'd love to talk to you about that as well. So feel free to reach out. If nothing else, happy automating, and we'll see you next time. Bye.